When I was a kid, my mom and her friends drank a rather limited variety of beers. Budweiser, Miller Genuine Draft, Michelob, and Coors. As I imagine is true for most people, these simple, refreshingly crushable lagers, at least for me, were the first beers that I tried, and I still rather enjoy them to this day. Of course, when I started brewing, which was in the same year that I was able to legally drink, I went through the whole hate big beer phase for a brief moment, and in doing so, I clumped together all lagers into this category. Ale was where it was at, and I viewed that as the true aficionado's beer. It wasn't until I took a trip to Germany in 2003 and drank their classic Pilsner Helles and the other variety of lagers they make there that I realized how wrong I was. These days, brewers have taken what was once universally viewed as subtle, delicately flavored category of beers and made it, well, not so subtle. This is the Brülosophy podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and this week I'm joined by contributor Jordan Folks to share our unabashed perspectives on the seemingly growing substyle of Hoppy lager.
Look at how far we've come, Beer, craft beer when we're getting started was unfiltered ale. And now people are loving lagers and crystal clear beer. And as you know, it doesn't have to be without flavor.
Without a doubt, it doesn't have to be without flavor. In fact, some might argue, two of us, I think, being in that group, that it offers just a different type of flavor that is equally as pungent as many of the ales that you and I kind of cut our teeth on. Now, by my recollection, over the last decade, give or take a couple of years, several newfangled versions of lager that possess much more hop character than their traditional relatives have been invented. We're going to be going through a list of these different, I put this in quotes, but styles, like I said, if that's what we're even going to call them, discussing the commonly accepted definitions, the differences, and of course, our opinions on each one. Now, just a friendly reminder, this is a Brews Views episode where we let our hair down and allow ourselves to be a bit more, open than usual. All that really means is that for those who choose to be offended by certain language, this may not be the episode for you, though I promise we're not going to go nuts. All right, if you're a fan of this show and you'd like to receive a reward for your support, please consider becoming a patron of Brülosophy over at patreon.com/Brülosophy, where you make a small pledge and receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique perks from YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invite to a monthly live brew day with a Brülosophy contributor, as well as inclusion in the various episodes that we do where we tap our patrons for their opinions and such. You can learn more about all of the rewards we offer for your support over at patreon.com/Brülosophy. Another really easy way to support us is by using the links found at Brülosophy.com/support when you're shopping online. Your experience doesn't change at all, and we get a little commission for that referral that helps us to continue covering costs for running all of this stuff. And finally, if you wouldn't mind leaving a rating and review of this show in Apple Podcast or wherever it is you listen to podcasts, that'd be awesome too. I was just reviewing some of our stats. As our listeners are well aware, we switched podcast host over the last couple of weeks. And in doing so, I've been able to open up, I got access to a lot more statistics. And one of them, I was shocked to see this. The vast majority of our listeners are actually listening on Spotify now, whereas it used to be Apple Podcasts. So the cool thing about Spotify is you can comment on individual episodes and we can actually comment back, unlike Apple. So if you have something to say, you can go say it over there if you're listening on Spotify. All right, feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who in addition to having an awesome YouTube channel chock full of great brewing-related content, sell what we believe to be are some of the best electric brewing systems on the market. If you've been considering making the move from propane to electric, you owe it to yourself to check out Clawhammer Supply. Whether you're after a 120-volt 5-gallon unit or something bigger like their powerful 240-volt 10-gallon system, Clawhammer has got you covered. Learn more about everything they have to offer at clawhammersupply.com, and don't forget to check out their YouTube channel as well. Listener Tom Newman wrote in with some interesting feedback. Tom said, first off, many thanks for all you do for the homebrewing community. I've been a regular listener and reader since 2018 and a patron since 2020, and I've greatly increased my enjoyment of homebrewing over that time. Well, thank you, Tom. We really do appreciate your support. He goes on to say, after reading Jordan's experiment comparing domestic two-row versus Czech Pilsner malt in a Czech pale lager, I was reminded of something I think about in my own brewing. How can I minimize my carbon footprint in what is a resource-intensive and some would say wasteful hobby? Despite the bounty of local malt and hops and our generally liberal leanings in the Pacific Northwest where I live, it's common for brewers here to speak proudly of using only continental European malt and hops, decoction mashing, RO water filtration, etc., in the name of making the best beer. He says, I love tradition and quality as much as the next beer geek, but it's hard to ignore the evidence of climate change all around us. And I'm always wanting there to be more discussion in the brewing community about how we can be better when it comes to climate change. Jordan, since that was your experiment, I thought this would be a good bit of feedback for you to respond to. And I'm curious of your thoughts on what Tom had to say here.
This feedback really resonates with me, and it's something that I'm really conflicted about because we can make such incredible beers using all local ingredients where we live in the Pacific, the west coast of America, me in the Pacific Northwest specifically. But, the carbon footprint of shipping something from, Idaho to Texas is obviously different than Germany to Florida. And so as we've shown with a lot of these experiments, you can make incredible European-style lagers with local ingredients. And part of me, kind of wants to just only use domestic ingredients, with one notable exception, New Zealand hops, which we'll get into later in the episode. Because, these classic American kind of noble-ish hops like Mount Hood and varieties like Idaho Pilsner malt, you can make amazing lagers and, call it a Helles, call it a pre-pro lager. It doesn't really matter. You can make amazing beer with local ingredients. And I totally understand the temptation to stick with local. And I think there's a really strong argument for it.
Yeah. We could start a whole new program talking about this kind of stuff. First off, Tom, I appreciate you bringing this up. I feel like in the world we live in today, you don't say anything that could even remotely be skewed as political. Fuck that. This is stupid. We are a science-based podcast. The science supports climate change. If you disagree with that, fine, stay in your corner. What I want to say is that, this is an important thing that I feel like a lot of people do ignore. And it's not even just the climate change stuff. For me, what resonates with me is the hypocrisy as humans, all of us humans. I'm not pointing the finger at anybody. I am in the group of folks who prefer using, Czech sots over American grown sots. Like, I get it. I'm not a big fan of virtue signaling. It's why we don't get into this kind of stuff very often on the show. So I'll just honestly say that I'm not sure what the best solution is for this. Since this is a Brews Use, I'll also say that while I harbor no hate for those who prefer using continental malts and such, and I can't say I'm not in that group, like I said before, it'd be impossible for me not to notice the hypocrisy of those who do so while deriding others for engaging in similar behavior, if that makes sense. I'll leave it at that. I do appreciate your feedback, Tom, and hopefully we can figure something out. Maybe that's another part of making this hobby more appealing to more people, is ensuring that we're doing it in the most efficient way as possible, which also includes, not contributing to climate change. So thanks again, Tom. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brülosophy.com or leave us a note on social media. All right, be sure to pick up your Brülosophy merch over at brülosophy.com/shop. We're offering more options than we ever have before, from t-shirts, hoodies, and hats to fanny packs, shorts, coffee mugs, and so much more. We've done our best to keep prices reasonable, and in a comparison of other merch that I've seen out there, we're quite reasonable. Plus, international shipping is now available. Again, you can head to brülosophy.com/shop and click one of the product images on that page, or you can go directly to our Dashery store at brülosophy.dashery.com. We've put a link in the description of this episode. There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of work, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. I believe it was a couple years ago that we were asked on a Brew&A episode about our desert island beer. Maybe it was even more recent than that. The one style we would drink if we could drink just one style for the rest of our lives. Not could, but like we're forced to. Now, I know I struggled to settle on just one specific style, but I'm 100% certain that whatever style I went with was a classic, European pale lager. I just love how simple and refreshing styles like Pilsner and Helles are. Well, back in 2015, soon after Brülosophy got off the ground, brewers seemed to be getting more comfortable making lagers. And I started to hear rumblings about versions that were way different than traditionally they were traditionally made. In particularly, with it, as it relates to hops, people were just hitting these lagers that you would never expect to be this hoppy with, IPA amounts of hops. In that same year, during a family trip to San Diego, I popped into a bottle shop and saw on the shelf a beer labeled IPL, which stands for what, Jordan?
India Pale Lager. May she rest in peace.
I know. What happened to that style? I think I know what happened to that style, but I remember thinking, okay, first off, nobody even calls IPA India Pale Ale anymore. IPA has become kind of the name of that style, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It doesn't really stand for anything anymore.
Yeah. I just, IPA is IPA. We know what that means. And I remember thinking, I guess it sort of makes sense. I mean, there was controversy when IPL became a thing that people talked about. It sort of makes sense that they would, riff off of the IPA thing because they're just making a beer basically that is an IPA, but there are some key differences that you would kind of align with pale lager. I get it. It's recognizable. It's kitschy. It's fun. But yeah, IPL, sadly, no, I mean, I don't know if it's too sad, but no longer really a thing these days. But thankfully, we'll get to some more that seem to have taken its place. Now, what's the history of IPL? I looked into this a bit, and I'm thinking, as it is with most modern styles, there's like one person or maybe a couple who spearheaded this movement, and their name is sort of attached to it. When it comes to IPL, there really, at least as far as I could find, there was no specific brewer or brewery that is noted as being kind of the inventor of it. But this, I'm not going to say this anymore. Every time we say style in this episode, just imagine we're putting air quotes around that. The BJCP does not list these as official styles, at least yet. So, but IPL was widely popularized by Jack's Abbey. That's a brewery out of Massachusetts that I know is very lager centric, as well as Ballast Point down in San Diego, California, during the mid 2000s. Now, if you recall, in the mid 2000s, whether you were a brewer or just a craft beer drinker, the mid 2000s was the extreme beer era. It seemed like every brewer, whether home or commercial, was trying to make the biggest, baddest beer possible. What I would contend might be some people were kind of aiming to see if they can actually hit the mark of undrinkable. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, there was a lot of undrinkable beer back then.
Oh my God.
IPL was probably a little more tame. But in my opinion, it was a pretty clunky style because, I love the direction that IPA has gone. And, we've kind of ditched the crystal malt. We're using more citrusy and tropical hops and less like piney and resiny ones. And, dropping off a lot of the malt backbone, way less body. And so IPL was during that classic era when we had all those things still. So it's like, it's basically breweries just take their standard IPA recipe that had 10% crystal malt and like a bunch of C hops and pitch some lager yeast on it and fermented at like, 50 degrees Fahrenheit. And so it was okay, but it just really didn't make the IPA expression any better, in my opinion. And so I think there's a reason you just don't see anyone throwing away around that term anymore, because there's kind of newer, modern, corollaries that people are kind of going for now. Exactly.
And so opinion-wise, for me, the issue with IPL was that they didn't change too much about the malt bill of an IPA, but then they tried to sell it as an IPL. And you already know my opinion on this. Yes, I am, of all of the ingredients in beer, yeast is my favorite. I think it's one of the most determining factors of how beer character turns out, all of that. But when you're, saturating a beer with alcohol and hops, as IPL did, right? I mean, it was a higher OG, just like IPA. Mm-hmm. It was hit with hops in the same exact way an IPA might be, but it's cool fermented with a lager yeast. I have a feeling like Jack's Abbey probably did it because that's what their system was set up for. And they were like, whatever, we can get away with making an IPA this way. I don't know if that's true or not, but to me, it just tasted like an overly caramel malty IPA that didn't present terribly well. Now, I only had, commercial wise, I think I only had 3 versions of IPL from commercial breweries. One for sure was Sierra Nevada, and I love Sierra Nevada. I hated that beer. I thought it was so gross. I would drink one like if it was all that was at a party or something, but I'm sitting there going, God, just give me a torpedo. I'd rather have that than this weird, caramely flavored IPL thing. So not my favorite style. And I remember thinking as we progressed, right, and people started making these new versions of hoppy lagers, we've already done this before. What are we going back to it? We know that ale yeast works just fine. It's easy. Why are we doing that? I'm glad we did, because we got some good stuff in, as an outcome. But now, one of the fun things that I did, people are going to hate me for this or they're going to laugh at it. I am not a fan of AI for, inventing art and all of that stuff, but it's here to stay. We all know that. And so for fun, I went to the free Google AI, Gemini or whatever it's called, and I asked it to create BJCP style descriptions for all of the styles we're going to talk about today. So these read like they're coming out of the BJCP guidelines, which I think is fun. Mind you, again, these are not, I think some of them might actually be in the BJCP, but we're going to go with the AI generated description. So here's what they gave me for India Pale Lager. A powerful hop-centric lager with the bitterness and alcoholic strength of an American IPA, but with a smoother, cleaner finish. It lacks the fruity esters of an ale, allowing the resinous, piney, and citrusy hop oils to stand in sharp relief against a sturdy malt backbone. I think that nails it. Jordan, what do you say?
I think that's a really impressive description, actually. It's just too bad you couldn't have had AI read that in a Gordon Strong voice.
God damn it. I should have done it. And recorded clips of all of it. I could have probably gotten Gordon to read them for us.
I love that Brülosophy is now deep faking Gordon Strong.
Not yet, but we will.
But this really points out why this style just doesn't make that much sense, in my opinion. When we're going to talk about West Coast Pilsner later, but notably the hops that you're using in West Coast Pilsner are not C hops. It's more citrusy tropical ones, and just something about a malty beer with a bunch of pine tree in it just doesn't work in a high OG lager.
And that's the weird thing, is that this is, for people like me who aren't afraid to talk about their opinions regarding the subtle differences between yeast strains. Okay. Even when it's lager versus ale, right? Pastorianus versus Cerevisiae. For some reason, it does work marginally better. I know that for people like you and me who have kind of evolved our preferences in terms of hoppy ales and lagers, that, we want that crystal malt out of there. We don't need that malt backbone, as people used to say. We want hops with a clean, crackery malt character, if anything, and a nice clean fermentation. I get that. But I can still drink a torpedo. I can still drink a Sierra Nevada Green Label, pale ale, and love it and appreciate what it is. For some reason, when lager yeast is used to ferment these beers at a cool temperature, it doesn't work for me. It's worse. It overemphasizes the aspects of a classic American IPA, even, that I'm just not a big fan of. So that's my opinion on IPL. It sounds like you and I are share that opinion.
Yeah, I mean, when you think of an IPL, first of all, what year is it? And second of all, what color is it?
That's a good point. It looks like an IPA. They tend to be a little bit more caramely or amber in color, right?
Right. And they were almost brown. And so it's just I think also part of it is that I didn't have any big, large craft brewery versions. I had more local, micro nano brewery options. And this would have been circa 2010 here in Portland. And I also think that those smaller breweries just weren't as adept at brewing lagers yet. There was a reason that they only brewed ales. And this is kind of a lot of their first forays into lager brewing. And maybe they didn't understand pitch rates and oxygenation and all the other things that really help make a really great lager, at least at the macro scale with a craft scale, given the ingredients we had at the time. And so there might have been multiple faults that just, be it design or execution, that just made it kind of bad. So why don't we move beyond something we didn't love into something that we really love? And maybe we can talk about Italian Pilsner.
Well, yeah. So Italian Pilsner, this is an interesting style. I was under the impression, and the reason that we started with IPL is because that was, by my recollection, that was the first real hoppy lager that got a lot of talk. Mid 2000s. For me, it was early 2010s to mid 2010s when I really started to notice people talking about it online. Surprisingly, Italian Pilsner has been around since 1996. I had no idea it came before IPL, and that's not the only hoppy lager that came before IPL, at least in terms of like somebody tagging it with a name. Italian Pilsner, the history of it, it was actually pioneered by Agostino Arioli of I'm going to mess this up, but Birrificio Italiano. He made a beer called Tipo Pils, and with that beer, he aimed to showcase the delicate beauty of hops through a traditional lager lens. And to me, that is the defining characteristic of Italian Pilsner, traditional lager lens. This is not Americans trying to make something that is already good completely different like they did with the IPL. This is somebody who lives in a region where Pilsner, pale lagers in general, are really the staple, and kind of putting his own spin on it, but still wanting to hang on to that traditional aspect of it.
So when we say Italian Pilsner, we don't mean Peroni. And so when I talk to non-craft beer nerds, like, normal people that don't listen to this podcast, they get very confused when I start to talk about the American craft beer movement around, quote, Italian Pilsner, because Italian Pilsners already existed in the form of things like Peroni, at least in like the language that we use around it. And so for the purposes of this episode, when we say Italian Pilsner, we're talking about these like hoppier, crafty versions of this style. And the Agostino is actually provided a lot of information about that recipe, and this beer does still exist. I saw it in a bottle shop one time, and it was like horrifically aged and stored warm, and it sucked. I would love to get to try it fresh someday. But you can look that up online, and there's some interviews, and you can get the recipe for that style of beer. But basically what we're looking at is a traditional lager grist, Pilsner malt, 1048 OG, something like that. Traditional, lager fermentation, 3470, 48 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that. And, kind of a German Pilsner approach to boil hops. So we're, looking at noble varieties, or maybe like modern quasi-nobles like Saphir or something like that. But the big difference is he dry hopped the beer. And so he's not dry hopping it at like modern American IPA levels. It's on a homebrew batch, something in the realm of like 1 or 2 ounces for 5 gallons of dry hop. And the effect, and you do this before lagering, and then you lager the beer, and the effect is just beautiful. You have this like German Pils, bitterness and like light malt, body, but this just beautiful, floral, spicy, a little fruity hop character that's really accentuated by this light dry hop. It's just absolutely beautiful. And, hands off to Agostino for inventing the style. And now you see American breweries, taking this to the next level. And we actually get to drink local examples. And so it's not beat up like these ones that have, come across the sea. And it's a really great one to brew yourself, because this style really benefits from being, little lagering, couple weeks or, 4 weeks or something, and then just fresh. And it's a great style. And Marshall, have you ever brewed one?
I have never brewed an Italian Pilsner. I absolutely have plans to do so, because like you, there's something special about, I love the sentiment that went into making this from Agostino, really wanting, like I said before, just wanting to hang on to that traditional piece, but put his own unique spin on it. And I absolutely love every Italian Pilsner I've ever had commercially. They've all come from commercial breweries, unless I don't know that somebody has shared with me an Italian Pilsner that was homebrewed. They are so good. Like dry hopping with noble hops is a money move when it comes to Pilsner. I absolutely love it. Now, I wanted to share some stuff. We got the AI description. I'm going to read that first, but then I'm going to read the description on the website, the Birrificio Italiano website of Tipo Pils. And it's kind of fun. They're different, but so the AI description for Italian Pilsner is a clean, crisp, and refreshing bitter lager with a significantly more pronounced and elegant dry hop aroma than a traditional German Pilsner. It balances a honey-like malt sweetness with a sophisticated, perfumey, and floral hop character that lingers into a snappy, dry finish. Jordan, that sounds spot on to me for the experiences that I've had with good Italian Pilsner.
Dude, I want one so bad right now.
Oh my God, me
My
too.
buddy works at Westbound and Down in Colorado. Incredible craft brewery, one of the best out there. And he just sent me like a freaking case of beer. He hooked it up. And he had a couple of their Italian Pilsners in there. And woo boy, Westbound and Down Italian Pilsner might be my favorite in America. Next time anyone is in Colorado, seek it out. I think it's a year-round flagship for them. Freaking incredible.
I am absolutely going to put pressure on Brad at Crow and Wolf to make an Italian Pilsner because he kills it with his lager beers anyways. I'm sure his would be excellent as well. But Tipo Pils, the original, here's I love this description on their website. I have to imagine this is interpreted from Italian. So it says, the mother of Italian-style Pilsners, whispering stories of barley fields and hop gardens, a timeless classic, the reinvention of a traditional style, the Birrificio Italiano way. Born in 1996, the first ever dry-hopped Pilsner, Tipo Pils is a milestone on the international craft beer scene and the one beer that started our new, quite long history. It may seem that most, quote, normal, the most, quote, normal among our beers, but it is exactly the one to leave the most decisive and long-lasting of marks. What a beautiful description of the beer that they invented.
And I kind of think that Agostino might have written that himself. I think he's a bit of a character in like the best way possible. And, in fact, I think that, what's that really good beer at Firestone, their lager?
Pivo Pils.
Pivo Pils, I believe, was a result of the Firestone Walker guy. What's his name? Matt Brülosophy.
Matt Brülosophy, yeah.
Brülosophy. And possibly also Vinny from Russian River trying this beer at like an Italian beer festival and meeting Agostino. And they're like, holy cow, we got to figure out how to do this at home. And so if my memory serves me well, the Pivo Pils and also STS Pils from Russian River are really direct descendants of their experience trying Agostino's beer in person.
I'll tell you what, Pivo Pils and STS Pils are some of my favorite domestically brewed lagers in general. So if that's the case, it would make sense. I do believe Pivo's dry hopped. I'm not aware. I thought STS was a Czech pale lager, but I could be wrong on that. Whatever it is.
No,
I love it. Yeah.
It's definitely, it's more of an Italian Pils. And there's a little aside I want to mention here, which is something called French Pilsner, which is basically the same thing except using French ingredients. And there's even French malt. And I made one for the website. There's a BYO article on Brew It Yourself Pierre Lachite French Pilsner, which is a riff on the Pierre Lachat French Pilsner by Von Ebert Brewing here in Portland. And one of the hop varieties that they use in the French Pilsner here is Aramis. And Aramis is a defining hop in that STS Pils. And so the STS Pilsner, I can't remember if it's dry hopped. I believe it is, 1 or 2 ounces in a 5-gallon batch equivalent. But that Aramis hop has a really distinct character. And so one could argue that Vinny's STS Pils is maybe even a French Pilsner, given his liberal additions of Aramis hops.
Well, what I love is that you don't even need a label, right? STS might pull from Agostino's Italian Pilsner. It might pull from the French Pils thing. It obviously is getting some stuff from the Czech and German Pilsners. Yo, do what you want. It's a delicious beer. And that's the fun thing about brewing is you don't have to define it by a pre-existing label. I do love me some Italian Pilsner. Now, I also wanted to share my opinion on the other popular Italian lagers that are out there. What I like to define them as, if I go out and they have Peroni on tap, I don't care where it's at. I usually order it because I love it. What I say with that is that is a German Pilsner brewed in Italy. That is not an Italian Pilsner. Yeah. So they are, before Agostino, we might have just said, oh, that's an Italian Pilsner because it's made there. To me, that is basically just a German Pilsner that's brewed in Italy, and it is absolutely delicious. It's big beer, all of that. Hate me for that. I love it. But I am a huge fan, opinion-wise, of the Agostino version, this craft version of Italian Pilsner. I think that if more people had access to it and if more people started brewing it, I think you would see a style like Italian Pilsner become just as popular as some of the other common or more modern hoppy lagers that we're going to be talking about on this show. And to me, me, the defining characteristic of Italian Pilsner is that it is dry hopped with traditional European noble varieties. That is the main push. Now, like you said, Jordan, I couldn't care less what people do with their beer. You could absolutely bring in some of these more, I guess, newer versions of those modern hop varieties, and it'll work just fine. Saphir, Aramis, even, which is a French hop. Some of the new hops that are coming out of like the Huel Lab in Germany that are really like, siblings or children of these common noble hops. You're going to get a lot of the same characteristics. It is amazing what you can do with noble hops. There was a big push. I remember, just 15 years ago, people would tell you cannot dry hop with noble hops. You're just going to get a dirty, earthy, gross mess. Well, they were wrong, as has been the case quite a bit, right?
I've also heard that you shouldn't add noble hops after 20 minutes in the boil.
Yep, I've heard the same.
And if you get Dave Carpenter's lager book, they have a published recipe for Freem Pilsner. There is a shit ton of Whirlpool noble type varieties in that beer. And I have definitely taken that page out of that book and have a pretty strong representation of noble-like varieties at the end of my German Pilsner boils. We had an experiment recently where we looked at the effect of an enzyme on a Pilsner. Look at that recipe. Go to the website and you'll see how much late addition noble or noble-ish varieties I'm using. In a German context, it's beautiful, man. These hops can really go a long way in both the Whirlpool and the dry hop. We're not using maybe 10 ounces in a Whirlpool or a dry hop like we might in a West Coast IPA or triple IPA or something like that. But there's definitely some room for a more liberal hand there.
Yeah, and this is how Brülosophy came to be. There are so many claims out there that people just pulled out of their ass. And that's just the reality. And I know people like to think that we're out here just trying to, buck the tradition. And I don't give a shit about that. My thing is, how do we know if that claim holds any water if we don't test it out? Well, here's proof in the pudding. There are a lot of people, the two of us, Jordan included, who heard that you never use noble hops in a dry hop or even late in the kettle. And we're sitting here saying, you're wrong, and I'm glad you were wrong because this is a really good idea. And if everybody just listened to you, we still wouldn't have access to these delicious Italian Pilsners. So keep that in mind, folks. Do fun stuff, experiment, have some fun with it. You might figure something new out even. So back in 2017, I had the absolute pleasure to be invited out to New Zealand, where I was a guest speaker along with Gordon Strong and Michael Tonsmeyer at their annual homebrew conference. And it was amazing. We were down in Nelson, which is their hop growing region. It's kind of like New Zealand's Yakima. And while I was there, you would go into the grocery store, no kidding, and you go to their beer section and you would see these Pilsners that were made by local breweries, Tuatara being a big one when I was there, Emerson's being another one, that were just, it would, Pilsner. And then you'd look at the label and it would say made with all of these New Zealand hops. And you're like, that's not really a Pilsner, is it? If it's made with these fruity, notably fruity, just juicy, New World hop varieties. And we would grab the bottles and crack them open and they were phenomenal. Absolutely delicious. I don't remember it being called anything other than Pilsner while I was there, but I do remember sitting in a small bus while they were carting us around, and the three of us, Mike, Gordon, and myself, talking about, hey, did you try that Tuatara, Pilsner? What's the deal with that? And all of us just kind of fawning over it. And I do believe it was because of that trip that Gordon came back and added a sub-style of New Zealand Pilsner to the BJCP. I could be wrong on that. Maybe it was there before, but this idea of, again, it kind of spins off of the Italian Pilsner thing where it's like, let's take what everybody's already drinking, what's known the world over, Pilsner, and put our unique spin on it. But also in New Zealand, we talked about the whole climate change stuff and carbon footprint. In New Zealand, they have access to great malt, to great hops. Yeast isn't that hard to come by. If they can make it all with stuff that they grow there, well, that's what they did. And out of that sprung this style that I absolutely love to this day, New Zealand Pilsner. What are your thoughts on that style?
Yeah, I absolutely adore New Zealand Pilsner. And I think we're going to talk about West Coast Pilsner in the next segment. That line is pretty thin. And it's this timing is perfect. I have a friend here in Portland. He likes to say that he's Portland's second most famous Kiwi. And he's a big local kind of personality in the beer scene here. And he just went to New Zealand and he brought back a bevy of New Zealand beers and invited me to a tasting room with a few people to try a bunch of fresh New Zealand beers. And so this was just last week, and I got to drink through a bevy of New Zealand Pilsners, New Zealand IPAs. And I will say one thing that surprised me is that they will blend in some American varieties sometimes into these beers. And they're definitely really latching on to kind of the American craft beer style culture with these like cartoony, artsy cans and listing their hops and stuff like that. And one thing that really struck me was how malty these beers are relative to the West Coast palate. And in fact, I didn't love most of them actually. I am just such a fan of dry beer that the New Zealand Pilsner is not nearly as attenuated as the type of beers that I'm used to from like Germany on the Pilsner side, or even here in America on the West Coast side of either IPA or West Coast kind of lager beers. And so it kind of shocked me. And one thing in your notes here is the key ingredients is it's made with a soft water profile. And that really resonates with me reading that right now. Because they're softer, they're maltier. And if you look at the BJCP guidelines, which are, based on his interviews with local, brewers of the style, they'll finish fairly high, like 10-13 might be a target FG, whereas for like a German Pils, we might be going for like half that at like 10-06. And so I really love the tropical expression that these hops bring to a Pilsner style. And it's pretty much the same approach that we just described for Italian Pilsner, but using tropical New Zealand varieties like Nelson or Motueka, Nectaron, Superdelic, etc. But I'm more of a fan of the American versions that I've tried, either the ones that I've brewed or American craft brewers that kind of know the style. Because I like a drier and crisper beer from a harder water profile and more attenuation. And the Kiwis, and as my Kiwi friend said, they like maltier beers than Americans, and it really plays out into how they're kind of fiddling with these modern styles over there.
Yeah. So, interesting anecdote here. When we went to this one, we were being carted around by local Kiwi homebrewers. That was the cool. It was actually like the grandmother of one of the club members, and she was one of the most awesome human beings I think I've ever met in my life. And when we were going in between places, she would say, "Do you guys want to stop at bottle shop or whatever?" And I remember one time walking into this grocery store, and again, it was like the most beautiful beer section. And half of the bottles were like plastic, like your regular 2-liter bottle, of beer. They do cider as well. There's a lot of cider over there. And at least this was 9 years ago. But so I remember grabbing a few of these plastic bottles, your PET bottles, those brown ones, and chilling them down. And they were Pilsners. They were these New Zealand Pilsners, and opening them up. And yes, they were way malty. And I thought, you know what? This is why they shouldn't use these PET bottles. So then on a second trip to the store, I only grabbed the glass ones, thinking like, yeah, I'm going to get the real good ones. They're not oxidized. They're not caramely. Sure enough, they tasted exactly the same. And I came to realize that's what their aim is that is one of the defining characteristics. And I was talking to some folks over there who make, homebrewers who make this style a lot. It's very popular over there, or it was again back then. And they were saying, yeah, you want that because that holds up that impression of sweetness from those Kiwi hops. If you take even Citra and you throw a bunch of Citra in a 100% Pilsner malt beer, you are going to get an impression of sweetness just from the hops. It's not sugar, but I think our brains associate that level of fruitiness with an element of sweet. I have a feeling that there, again, I can only speak from my own mind here, but that there is a wide swath of people, and perhaps a lot of them live, on the islands of New Zealand, who really like that combination of malt with that impression of sweetness that you get from those amazingly delicious Kiwi hops. I don't know for sure. But I like you, I really appreciate the style. I'm going to pick Italian Pils over New Zealand Pils all day long. This is Brews Views. I'll share that opinion. I really appreciate a nice, dry, crisp, refreshing beer. But a good New Zealand Pilsner on a hot day, I'm not going to turn it down. It's really good. If I'm making my own, I am probably going, 95% Pilsner malt with maybe 5%, I don't know, C10 or something like that. Nothing too caramely, but another big thing that, like you said, is the soft water profile. I do think that emphasizes malt. Most people agree with that. I would probably up the gypsum if I was making a New Zealand Pilsner myself, just to get that crispness.
Yeah, it's funny the way that you described that. It made me realize that when you have this sweeter finishing gravity and the softer water profile and these really tropical forward hops, it almost has this effect of like eating an overripe tropical fruit, and you can just like feel that experience, the softness in your mouth. And apparently kiwis, the people, not the fruit, they really like candy. I guess they're like really obsessed with candy and sweets there. And so this kind of all tracks that they're making these sweeter beers with these tropical fruit expressions from the hops. And I'll also say that they also have a lot of fruit beers there. And so it'll be like a New Zealand Pilsner base or whatever, but with pineapple or with passion fruit and stuff like that. So it all tracks. But Marshall, I actually have a locally made or American made New Zealand Pilsner, and I'd love to read you the ingredients because it's kind of interesting to think about what hops we could use in this style.
Yes, do it. I'm curious.
So I've got Spirit of the Foo. This is a collab between two of my favorite West Coast IPA brewers, Westbound and Down out of Colorado and North Park Beer Co. out of San Diego. First hop mentioned on the list, Simcoe. We've also got Southern
not
Cross.
from New Zealand.
I know, right? And maybe that's a bittering hop, but I don't know.
Yeah.
So we got Simcoe, Southern Cross, Peacherine. That hop rocks. I would love to get my hands on that, but I don't make it for homebrewers. Nelson, Nectaron, Mosaic. And I unfortunately already tossed the can. I had another one, a New Zealand Pilsner that was just from Westbound and Down, not a collab. And I think it was like Crush, Citra, Mosaic, don't quote me, and Nelson. And it was like 3 American varieties and 1 New Zealand variety. And they're packaging it and selling it as a New Zealand Pilsner. Now, I'll say Crush has a bit of a New Zealand character, and so I think it's a bit of an American cheater hop, kind of getting back to our caller earlier that mentioned that why don't we use more American-grown ingredients, and I think that Crush is a really good one for kind of American cheat for a New Zealand style hop. But I saw that too with the New Zealand variety beers that I was trying last week. They're blending in some Northwest, fruitier forward hops like Mosaic into these beers, and it really works great. So don't be limited to just New Zealand varieties when, architecting your next New Zealand Pilsner recipe.
Well, I think that's a really good point. There are a lot of people who get so hung up on they hear the name of a style of beer and they're like, there's a hard definition for that style. Don't call it that unless you do exactly what you're supposed to do. I do not fall into that camp on any style whatsoever. Maybe like Cal Common, because if you don't do specific things, you're basically just making an amber ale or an amber lager. Cal Common has some very specifics, like Northern Brewer hops. You kind of have to use that in a Cal Common. But for the most part, what you're looking for are hops that have that Kiwi character, that New Zealand hop character. Here's an interesting, this kind of goes along with what you were talking about in kind of substituting Kiwi-like American-grown hops for actual New Zealand hops. When we were out there in 2017, everybody that we talked to, I don't want to be absolute, most of the people that we talked to talked about their love of Riwaka. Have you ever used Riwaka hops, Jordan?
I fucking love Riwaka.
It is.
You got to be
nuts.
careful. It's potent. It's very potent. And so it is not 100% of your hop bill. Absolutely not.
It is painfully potent. It is known for its very high oil content. To me, it's, people used to call Centennial Cascade. Super Cascade is what they called it. If that's the case, then Riwaka is like Super Centennial. It is amazing. Good luck finding it over here, especially as a home brewer. It's so popular in New Zealand that almost all of their craft breweries buy it up. So if you're looking for that Riwaka character in an American-made New Zealand New Zealand style Pilsner, then you're probably going to lean into something like Simcoe or Mosaic, something that has that oily hop punch that you need to get in this style to really make it represent what it was designed to be. So again,
I want to push back on you actually, Marshall. I think that Riwaka is one of the most unique hops, and I think that one particularly is going to be really hard to substitute.
Oh yeah,
because it has this really potent diesel character, and it's probably one of the most polarizing hops out there, in my opinion. Maybe up there with like Sabro and Nelson. How some people don't like Nelson, I will never understand. There's such a beautiful hop, but I hear a lot of polarizing views on that. But yeah, Riwaka is not for everyone, but it sure is for me. Just pour a gallon of gasoline in my keg. Let's go.
Kerosene. I get kerosene from it. That really almost sharp, gassy note, but I don't disagree with you. The point that I was made, I feel like I fully agree with you. The point that I was trying to make is another American grown hop that is known for being kind of diesely is Mosaic. So by pairing that with maybe some Simcoe and something else, you're not going to hit Riwaka. That is such a unique hop. If you have the opportunity to pick some up, I'm telling this to our listeners, try it out. It's a lot of fun. But if, doing your best to get that because you just can't get your hands on Riwaka, what I'm trying to say is I understand why American brewers might opt for an American hop blend to try to match some of what they just can't get enough of from New Zealand. Maybe I'm wrong on that though. And still, this is the last style or sub-style that we're going to be talking about in this segment. And I like it. It's not my favorite, but I will drink New Zealand Pilsner over IPL all day long. Again, just to reiterate, my preference would be a little bit less on that caramely malt character, but even so, a good New Zealand Pilsner is absolutely refreshing. It's very delicious. Now, one thing I do want to point out, the three styles of hoppy lager that we talked about in this segment, IPL, Italian Pilsner, and New Zealand Pilsner, are all fermented with traditional lager yeast, most of them probably going with more of a robust strain like the Weihenstephaner, 3470 strain at traditional lager temperatures, give or take. And they all just get hopped to high heaven with a different style of hops and maybe a little bit different technique for each one. Obviously, IPL being the higher OG, closest to an American IPA knockoff. In the next segment, we are going to get to some more unique styles. We'll be right back talking about those hoppy lagers. Stop guessing and start perfecting your craft with Brewfather, the ultimate tool for recipe design. Brewfather Premium unlocks advanced inventory tracking, tilt integration for real-time fermentation monitoring, and seamless cloud sync across all of your devices. But wait, there's more. Premium Plus just changed the game with Brewfather's brand new AI recipe integration. Whether you're looking to clone a rare commercial classic or need a creative spark for a unique grain bill, Brewfather AI helps you build balanced, world-class recipes in seconds. Brewing is a science. Make it art with Brewfather Premium Plus by visiting brewfather.app today. That's brewfather.app. Better beer is just a click away. Now that we've talked about some of the earlier versions of hoppy lagers, we're going to shift our focus to more modern versions, starting with the one that seems to have gained a lot of attention lately and is brewed, well, rather often by the co-host of this here episode.
So we're going to talk about West Coast Pilsner. And Marshall, this is one of my absolute favorite styles in the modern craft beer landscape. And after that last segment, talking about these amazing hoppy lagers, dude, I got to crack into one because like I said, my buddy just sent me from Westbound and Down a bunch of their beers. And I looked in the fridge and I have a West Coast Pilsner called Infinity Pils. And it uses Citra and Mosaic classic combo. And, we don't normally drink on the pod, but, I just feel I got to do it. So let's just crack this open. And while I'm pouring this, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the history of West Coast Pils.
Yeah. And first off, before I even get into that, I am so bummed out that I promised my son I'd go to the gym with him today because I'm not going to drink a beer before I go to the gym. But God, even you drinking that, I still have a Summerfest, Sierra Nevada Summerfest in my fridge that I just picked up last week, and I would drink that with you and pretend that it was a West Coast Pilsner. Now I'm thirsty.
Can you smell it from here?
Oh God, I can smell. Yeah, well, yeah, we're going to talk about the beauty that is West Coast Pilsner right now, and I've got some fun little some butter in your buns here that I'm going to do in a minute.
Dude, this one is so fucking good.
I want it so bad, dude. You're making me jealous.
All right, I'm just going to sit here and bliss out for a little bit while you talk about Bob Coons.
All of our listeners like, God damn it, we just want some too, man. So history, it's credited to Bob Coons of Highland Park Brewery, who made Timbo Pils back around 2016. So when we say that West Coast Pilsner is kind of a modern take on where IPL and Italian Pilsner, New Zealand Pilsner kind of started, that's what we mean by it, is that this is basically a 10-year-old style that really only started to gain prominence by my understanding and memory. Maybe like 5 years ago is when you really started to hear about people referring to this as a West Coast Pilsner. Now my understanding is that Bob from Highland Park is who called it a West Coast Pilsner. And it is kind of what you're imagining now. We've already referenced it a little bit in the last segment. It is a incredible, this is our opinion here, incredible spin on the modern hoppy lager that I would say is probably my favorite. It is in my top 5 favorite styles right now of all time. If I had to pick 5 styles, this is making it. It is a phenomenal style of beer. The AI description of which is a very pale, ultra dry lager delivering the punchy, dank hop saturation of a West Coast IPA. It prioritizes, quote, crushability and finishes with a sharp, clean bitterness. All day long, this is such an incredible style.
Yeah, and there's a lot of ways that you can go about it too. You know, like we said, with this one that I just popped open is American variety Citra Mosaic. A lot of the best ones, in my opinion, have a heavy hand of New Zealand varieties.
Yeah,
Nelson is like damn near a requirement for the style, in my opinion. There's a lot of Nelson being thrown at these, but the origin story is kind of funny. As I recall, it was like a festival or something, and they wanted something unique to bring, and so, or maybe it was like an anniversary party, and so they filled like a cask with 50% of their German Pils and 50% of like a Mosaic IPA, and Timbo Pils was born, and they're like, this could be something. So now they actually purposely brew it, and I'm sure the recipe's evolved. I can't remember if Timbo's 100% Mosaic right now or not, but it's funny, Marshall, the last time that we were planning for an episode together, I was at Highland Park waiting for my flight, and we were like going back and forth on the Brew and A questions we were going to answer. So I was just there, and I was actually in LA this week too, but I went to Monkish instead. And dude, Highland Park is such a good brewery in general, but their West Coast Pilsner game is top notch. And it's exactly what you think it is. It's a Pilsner format. So you got that appropriate bitterness, really light Pilsner malt, low body, with heavy late kettle, whirlpool hopping, dry hopping, lager yeast, but very, very tropical varieties of hops being used, be them American, New Zealand, Australian. However, the fermentation, though, there is some debate there. And some people are fermenting them colder, 50 degrees Fahrenheit or so. Others a little warmer, 60 degrees, 65 degrees. And that's not just home brewers, the blasphemous Brulosophers. It's also, there are pro brewers out there that are fermenting these a little warmer. And I think there's even some Kiwi brewers that are brewing their New Zealand Pilsners a little warmer in that like kind of 60 degrees Fahrenheit range. And with a robust yeast like 3470, you can get away with it for sure. And in fact, I don't ferment my West Coast Pilsners as cold as like a German Pils because you don't want a ton of sulfur here. And so I'll go closer to like 50, 52 as opposed to like 46, 48 for a more European variety because we want, get that sulfur out of there. You want a little bit. It definitely is a hallmark of the style. And something about the combination of like a little bit of sulfur, like a really trace amount with a New Zealand variety, it just pops, it explodes. Dude. And it actually has a really long shelf life relative to some other American varieties. These are lagered for 2 to 4 weeks or something like that to kind of like refine it and kind of drop everything out and like mellow and become cohesive. But they have a ton of staying power, and there is some conspiracy theory around something about the lager yeast just helps these things just last a lot longer in a much fresher way.
Yeah, I don't know how big of a conspiracy that is. I know it's certainly something a lot of people have opinions on. I'm with you. There's something weird about, particularly 3470, which for those who may not know yeast strains, that is your WLP 830 German lager. That is Imperial Yeast Global, their L13. Y Yeast has a version of 3470. 3470 is what Fermentis, the SAF lager, calls it, W-3470. So it is a phenomenally robust yeast that we have found, fermented cool or warm, still produces a very clean beer. Albeit some people think it's different. That's fine. It's still very clean. I did a little review of Brewfather West Coast Pilsner recipes yesterday while I was waiting at the hospital for my wife who was having surgery. What I found is that a kind of a roundabout average fermentation temperature is about 55 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm not sure that anybody could taste the difference between 46 and 55 degrees Fahrenheit. That's just my opinion, regardless of the style. But it does seem that people are a little bit more lenient on, when they're making West Coast Pilsner, at least, on their fermentation temperature when using that yeast. I also saw that the most common mother strain of yeast used was 3470. That seems to be the go-to for a lot of people with this style. So it would make sense that they're comfortable pushing the temperature up a little bit higher.
Yeah, and the other strain I love to use for this is a Ondex strain, which is Imperial Pilgrimage. Please bring it back for home brewers. I think White Labs does have a year-round offering for the Ondex strain. There's a few different ways you can skin the cat here, but generally speaking, tropical citrus forward hops, save your, dank C hops for another brew, or at the very least don't like only feature those. And, no crystal malt, no mutic malt, super light, super crushable, super hoppy.
Yeah, one of the other things that I read about this this style, just again, kind of amalgamating the information that I found online, is that it is recommended to use 100% Pilsner malt. Now you could go with Pilsner malt that is, again, locally malted, grown and malted. If you have a local maltster and they make a Pilsner malt, give it a go. I know that when we were using Mecca Grade Estate malt, which is no longer, unfortunately, their Pilsner malt, I always got just this hint of vanilla. It was such a subtle whisper of it, but it was there. And a lot of people that would drink my beers when I was using that malt, I believe it was their Pelton, would say the same thing. They're like, there's something creamy or kind of unctuous about this. If that doesn't work in your beer style, then find another malt, to use. But for something like a West Coast Pilsner, it's not a in-your-face characteristic. It actually really brought out that fullness of the beer in my experience. Now, I'm not saying I ever made a West Coast Pilsner using it. I made a lot of hoppy beers that were 100% Pilsner malt, and that's what I felt. I imagine it would work well, but you could also rely on these continental malts as well, and you're going to get away with an incredibly crushable, delicious, hoppy beer. In my opinion, West Coast Pilsner is the best way to you have a blank palate and you're throwing hops at it, and it's all upheld in this beautifully refreshing style of beer. It's so good.
It's so good, man. I'm loving this one I'm trying right now. I will say that, another thing you want these dry, in my opinion. So lower mash temps, maybe enzyme if you need it. I do. You could use a little sugar if you need to help to get down there. And actually, the other day I brewed one and I didn't have enough Pilsner malt for the grist, so I used a pound of toasted flaked rice. And so I think we're going to talk about cold IPA next, which uses a really heavy hand on the adjuncts. But, you could probably use a little bit of rice or something on this to help dry it out and keep the body light.
Yeah, that's the key, right? When I say 100% Pilsner malt as the recommendation, the idea behind that is this is supposed to be a very dry beer. What do you mash your West Coast Pilsner at, temperature-wise? So,
yeah, I'm looking at I want to go as low as I can while hitting the gelatization point. So, I might about 148 or something like that.
Yeah, 148. I forget what that is in Celsius. You'll have to forgive us, but a nice low, the lower end of the range in your mash temperature with all Pilsner malt. Anybody who brews Pilsner on the regular understands what that's going to do for your attenuation. It is a very good thing for this style. So if you are into crushably dry beers and you like hops, and you have not made a West Coast Pilsner, we can't recommend it enough. Feel free to bother the hell out of Jordan at Brülosophy.com. He is a West Coast Pilsner freak. I have to get this out there. Yours is still, to this day, the best West Coast Pilsner I've ever consumed, Jordan. You are so good at making this style of beer. You mentioned earlier when you opened the can that you're drinking now, can you smell it from there? I will never forget standing in your house and you pouring me off the tap, and I'm standing 3-4 feet away from you pouring this beer. And suddenly it was like I was standing in Yakima during hop harvest. Amazingly aromatic that these beers are, and you have a special ability when it comes to keeping them that way. One last question before we move on to cold IPA, which is going to be a fun one to talk about as well. Are you using downstream hop products, not just hop pellets or hop flour? Are you actually using like some of these modern Spectrum and stuff like that when you're making your West Coast Pilsner?
Wow, that's literally what I was going to say. Was the secret to making these great beers is flowable hop products. So I think that the West Coast Pilsner especially really works well with the Haas product Spectrum, which is a flowable dry hop product. I also think that pretty much any West Coast style hoppy beer, if you can, find it and afford it, adding the incognito on the at the dip hop has this incredible potent character that it adds, and that's a flowable product that's actually intended to be a Whirlpool edition. But North Park, the brewery I mentioned earlier, they kind of pioneered this method where you add it to your fermenter and run a little bit of hot wort into there before you turn your chiller on, and just kind of mix that up and then close your fermenter off and let that just kind of hang out for a little bit and melt into solution, and then put your cold, chilled, the rest of your wort right on top of that. And it just has this incredible effect of these potent, exploding out of the glass hop aromas. You're blowing a lot of smoke, but you really should be blowing it at the ingredients, because Yakima Valley hops have put these into homebrewers' hands, and you can make world-class hoppy beers at home with these flowables.
Yeah, and a lot of people, I've received a few emails, not many, who hear us talking about these flowables. The two that you mentioned in particular, Spectrum, I know, has become sought after, but people look at it and they're like, but it's fucking expensive.
Yeah.
Well, relative to how much you're getting, yeah, it might feel like it's kind of expensive. You're paying what you would pay for 3 pints of beer at a brewery for this thing that is going to make you 5 gallons of beer. If what you're after is the freshest, most pungent hop character in a beautiful West Coast Pilsner, drop your cash on some Spectrum. We're not even sponsored by Yakima Valley Hops anymore. Doesn't mean we don't love them and want to encourage everybody to go buy their stuff. This stuff is amazing. I have not used it yet. I have plans to, based purely on my experience with your beers, Jordan. So it sounds like you agree with me. Just drop your coin on some of this stuff to make the best beer possible.
It's funny how we penny pinch with these recipes. It's like, Spectrum, it's $15.
Yeah.
Dude, in California, that's a pint and a half.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
It's like people, we have these like weird loss aversions around money, and this is a hobby. It's hobbies for spending money, not saving, right?
Yeah.
I'm telling you, spend the extra $15, $30, add Spectrum, add Incognito. You can make the best beer you've ever had.
It's phenomenal. Yeah, I agree with you. Now, you live in Portland, and when we talk about, I have a feeling that most of us at Brülosophy, if you were like, what's your favorite, local brewery? Most of us are pointing to a brewery that is emphasizing lager styles these days. One of my favorite that I've been to, I've listed this many times, that, you've got Bierstadt in Denver, Colorado, Chuckanut I believe it's Mount Vernon, Washington. You've got Freem, which is in Mount Hood. These are all some of my favorite. On that list is Wayfinder Beer, which is right there in Portland. They make some of the best every beer that Kevin Davey was making when he was the head brewer there, in my opinion, was phenomenal, and most of them were lagers. Now, in 2018, he had this idea, and he went with it, and it ended up being called Cold IPA. I don't know if I'd ever been more confused about a style upon its initiation than I was with cold IPA, because I didn't quite understand what it was that went into making this style. What are your thoughts on cold IPA?
Cold IPA is a style, and honestly, it feels like it's kind of dying. And so we really need to make sure that doesn't happen, because I will contend it is truly unique and it is different than American IPA. So one of the biggest differences here is it has like 30% adjunct, either rice or corn, whereas American IPA, New England IPA, does not have that level of rice or corn adjunct in it. And so the effect there is it really dries it out. You know, Kevin's like theory was like, what if we combined American IPA with malt liquor? And so we're going kind of high, 1060, 1065 OG, with a ton of adjunct. He cereal mashes his, but you can use a flaked one if that's your preference. Mm-hmm. And we're trying to go super light in body, super crisp, super bitter. He's doing like 60 IBUs at the bittering charge or something like that. And famously fermented with lager yeast, warm. Blasphemy.
Yep. What do you make of that? You're the the traditionalist here.
Well, as you know, I pretty much only use Global in every beer that I make. Obviously, if I'm making a Belgian beer, I'm going to use a Belgian yeast or something like that. But Global is very robust and can go in any direction. And so I think Kevin's recommendation was about 60 degrees Fahrenheit for fermenting these beers. He was also spunding the beer during the dry hop phase. At the homebrew level, I find that too challenging to try to transfer off of dry hops with a carbonated beverage. The nucleation sites, the foaming is just crazy. So I don't recommend that at the homebrew level. But yeah, you can make a super clean beer with these certain lager yeast, fermented a little warm. And it's really changed the game. And in fact, a lot of West Coast IPAs now are just made with lager yeast. It just works.
Yeah. Yet again, one of my favorite West Coast IPAs I ever had was at your house in the same visit, and it was fermented relatively warm with 3470 with Imperial Yeast L13 Global. So there you have it, folks. I mean, that is a robust yeast strain that you can use for pretty much any clean style of beer that you want. I have had the cold IPA. I forget what it was called. I had the cold IPA, though, that Kevin made at Wayfinder, and my God, was it good. It really does. To me, I felt like Kevin, I don't know. I've never asked him. He's such a great guy. We've had him on for Q&A and stuff like that. But I never asked him about the advent of cold IPA and what his real thinking was. But I can't help but imagine that there was a part of him going, all right, IPL sucked, right? We tried it. We failed. Let's see what we can do to make it better. Can we take this kind of weird, malty mess of a style and improve upon it? And what he did is he integrated lager yeast. He removed all of that, crystal malt, and he added more hops, in my opinion, probably later on in the process. And he just made this beautiful, in my opinion, style of pretty much IPA that was just crisper, cleaner, and in my opinion, easier to drink than even most West Coast IPAs fermented with ale yeast. We have Crow and Wolf here, and one of my favorite beers that they make is called Frostbite. It is a cold IPA. They use, by my understanding, they use a decent chunk of adjunct. I think they're using rice. And it just really does lighten up that body and make it drink like a Pilsner that has a little bit more alcohol and a shit ton more hop character. I really like the style. Are you the type, Jordan, if you see it on tap, are you going to try it?
Just depends on how I'm feeling, but I absolutely love cold IPA. And yeah, it's definitely going to be on my short list.
Because of we're kind of fawning over the last two styles, right? West Coast Pilsner and cold IPA. I'm going to read the AI description here in a second, but if you had to, just from your own personal experience, kind of point out the differences between these two styles, where are you going? Like the primary differences between a West Coast Pilsner and a cold IPA. Where are you going with on that?
It's honestly strength, and I guess the adjunct. Otherwise, they're really similar. A West Coast Pils might be 1048 OG. A cold IPA might be 1065 OG. You're going to adjust your bitterness accordingly to have probably a similar BU to OG ratio.
Yeah.
But even the hopping amounts are going to be fairly similar in terms of the late hop additions. It's just the OG, the bitterness, and the use of adjunct is way higher in cold IPA.
Yeah, you nailed everything that I had in my mind as well. So cold IPA really is more IPA. And I think that's the key. West Coast Pilsner is just a very hoppy Pilsner with a bunch of fruity hops in it. I mean, both are dry. Both are very, if you had them side by side, it's like, how drunk do I want to get, right? I'm just going to pick the one that's going to get me there faster, I suppose. But both excellent styles. Here's the the AIG BJCP description: an aggressively hopped, straw-colored beer designed for pure hop expression. It is lighter in body than a West Coast IPA and cleaner than an IPL. Again, that is exactly how I view cold IPA, particularly the cleaner than an IPL, which again just always presented as kind of messy to me.
And I think Kevin was like, let's actually make a, quote, lager IPA that's actually good.
Yeah.
And so I'm so glad that he invented the style, because it is one of the most world-changing styles that we've seen in a long time.
Oh, that's heavy remarks on cold IPA. What brings you to that? Because do you feel like it spurred off? People kind of spun off of it, or?
I mean, Timbo Pills, made in 2016, so just a couple years before that. But I think that those two beers really launched the lager yeast ale fermentation approach in hoppy beers in professional breweries. I'm curious if you were fermenting beers warm with lager yeast before that on the Brülosophy website, but so maybe we can claim some of the credit too.
I don't want to claim the credit, but I absolutely was. I mean, I was the dork who was getting yelled at by readers of stuff back in 2015 for doing it. So but that's the thing. Who knows? Who cares? We're here today with these delicious, awesome, again, air quote styles that I hope get added to the BJCP just because of how incredibly good they are. So we've got a couple honorable mentions. The reason I call them that is because I cannot justifiably include them in the hoppy lager kind of under that umbrella, because one of them maybe, though it's kind of a sub style of what I would call is like a West Coast Pilsner, and that's contemporary American Pilsner. I've never heard anybody refer to it as that, so I kind of came up with that term myself. But there are some folks out there, I've seen some references to it online, who are kind of reimagining a pre-prohibition style of Pilsner that is flavorful, well-balanced. They're American lagers using classic C hops, so not really leaning into just that hyper fruity Citra Simcoe mosaic thing, but sticking with like Cascade and Centennial. They're just doing it in a lager format. And I don't know. I've made styles like this before. They taste great, but I feel like you could kind of include them.
Marshall, I can't really think of too many examples like this. When I think of contemporary American Pilsner, I'm thinking more of like cluster hops or something like that. I'm sure someone out there has made an American Pilsner using Cascade or something, but that's not something I see a ton of in my travels. What examples can you think of?
I can't think of any commercial examples. Again, this was something that I just didn't want to neglect the folks who are out there who, I was reading through different forum posts over the last 5-6 years who are making, classic American style lagers, but they're not using Mount Hood, stuff like that you would usually see in that, or cluster. What they're doing is upping that hop amount. They might be using those classic hops, don't get me wrong, but they're using way more than you might in a traditional American lager. Again, it's just riffing on a style and people having fun with it. You and I had talked about in West Coast Pilsner, people tend to kind of shy away from those classic C hops for more fruity hops. There are folks who aren't doing that, and I just wanted to make sure that we included them because we love you as well. And I've made them myself. I've done this. In fact, the very first time I believe it was the very first article that we did for our short and shoddy series was exactly this. I used some leftover C hops, 100% Pilsner malt, and I fermented it with, some slurry of lager yeast that I had sitting in my fridge, and it was quite good. But I prefer West Coast Pilsner. Again, not really one that we had to include. I just wanted to give them some love. More than anything, and this is not a lager, but it really presents like one, is Brewed IPA. I'm curious of your thoughts of me including this in an honorable mention for Hoppy Lager. But Brut IPA is notable for being invented back in 2017 at the Social Kitchen and Brewery in San Francisco by Kim Sturdivant, a wonderful brewer. Social Kitchen is no longer around, unfortunately, but his name is attached to Brut IPA, which the AI description at least is an extremely pale, effervescent, and bone-dry IPA with nearly zero residual sugar. It features bright aromatics and very low bitterness to avoid clashing with the very thin body.
Yeah, I actually, before I was a contributor, remember I sent you a beer that Jersey and Tim reviewed that was a Brut IPA. And I think that I claim the credit of Tim saying this is the first IPA he liked.
And to this day, it is the best brewed IPA that I've ever tasted. So there you go.
Well,
buddy.
It's the only one I ever brewed. So I wish I could go back in time to try that again. But I recall it was, I think, 100% Mosaic, or maybe there was some Citra too. But yeah, you got to use this like, amyl glucosidase enzyme, because you want that FG to be like 1.000, so as dry as possible. And so you actually want to use a little bit of a lighter hand on the bittering, more like a hazy IPA approach to bittering, kind of with like 20 IBUs or something like that from the bittering charge, and then pretty much everything else on Whirlpool and dry hop. Because if you have a 60 IBU charge at the beginning of the brew, it's going to be bitter as hell with that level of attenuation.
This is one of those styles that you don't see anywhere anymore.
Nope.
And I don't think it's because people didn't like it. I think it's because it is a convoluted process relative to other beer styles to make. You really do need to use some sort of a enzyme like this amyloglucosidase or glucosidase, my goodness, in order to drive that attenuation down to make it this champagne. The reason it's called Brut IPA is because it has a lot of characteristics shared with champagne. It's highly effervescent. It's bone dry, except it's very, very hoppy. And I had one made by somebody, a home brewer one time, that was made with just Nelson Sauvin hops. Can you imagine? I mean, it was champagne-y. It was great. Most brewed IPA that I had, though, commercially speaking, and we're talking big breweries, big well-known breweries, were god-awful. They just didn't hit the mark. The best commercial example I had was from a local brewery here in town. And if I'm not mistaken, the reason I included this on this episode, the brewer there shared with me he used 3470 to ferment his because of its ability to really drive attenuation in low mash temperature worts. And I thought, man, I'm surprised that didn't become something that we did, as mashing at 146 Fahrenheit as opposed to 154 or whatever, and then hitting it with something like 3470 instead of a clean ale yeast. Do you recall what yeast you used to ferment yours?
I probably would have used a Chico strain, I think.
Yeah, I think that's what's common, yeah.
In my experience, I get a bit more attenuation from Chico than 3470. So I think that Chico is a good one. But if you're using an enzyme, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter.
Because, don't use a Belgian strain maybe just because it's going to be a different beer. But yeah, I think that's an interesting idea that this is, more adjacent to these things than, a stout. And so I think it's a fair honorable mention.
Yeah, I actually had heard, now, mind you, West Coast Pilsner is effectively 1 year older in terms of when it was, I guess, coined, that term, or when it was invented, than Brut IPA. But I was always under the impression that the reason West Coast Pilsner got popular was because of people trying Brut IPA and thinking, man, we could probably do something similar to this, but without all of the extra stuff involved in making a brewed IPA, namely that enzyme. But I guess I was wrong because, West Coast Pilsner is a year older than brewed IPA effectively. But brewed IPA, if it's done well, can be delicious. If it's not done well, it is, in my opinion, it's real bad. There's some weird stuff that can happen when you're throwing enzymes at beers like that and using ale yeast and stuff that's supposed to be really dry. But I felt like it was a good one to include in this. And that is the last one I have on my list. Are there any other things that you want to mention before we wrap this one up, Jordan?
Just to counteract anyone that was going to write in to say this, German Pilsner is probably the OG hoppy lager. And that's probably my desert island beer, to kind of come back to the beginning of the episode. So there's a lot of different ways to skin the cat, be it, American varieties, New Zealand varieties, Australian varieties, noble varieties, but go out there and brew some hoppy lager. You're not going to regret it.
Yeah, have some fun with your brewing. It's the beauty of a hobby. And if you mess it up, oh well, drink it anyways. Share it with your friends. They won't notice. That is all the time we've got for this episode. Please make sure to head to Brülosophy.com to stay current on all of the fun beer and brewing stuff we are up to. The Brülosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to Brülosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit Patreon.com/Brülosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brülosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman, no.